Cuba wants peace. Cuba does not provoke, does not attack, nor challenge. We continue betting on a climate of understanding with the United States based on mutual respect. Despite our differences, as it was demonstrated that it is possible. However, if the homeland is attacked, we will respond in legitimate defense.
As Trump talks about Cuba having sort of collapsed, is Havana now quietly preparing for war, turning crisis rhetoric into concrete steps to brace for a possible clash with the United States? With reports that weapons are being handed to ordinary citizens, is Havana arming civilians as fears of a potential US invasion grow and the island dusts off its old defense playbook? As Washington tightens the screws with fresh sanctions and energy pressure, is Cuba preparing to resist by hardening its society, rallying around its revolutionaries and warning it will not bow? From the Iran war to a looming Caribbean crisis, is the United States now edging toward a new Cuba flashpoint at the very moment its attention and resources are stretched across multiple fronts? Amid sharply rising US-Cuba tensions, new reports claim Havana is arming civilians for defense, fueling speculation that the government is preparing for a worst-case confrontation scenario. On June 6, regional media reported that Cuba had begun distributing weapons to selected citizens, describing it as part of a wider effort to ready neighborhoods and workplaces for crisis. Those reports said officials in Havana were urging residents to prepare for a possible US invasion, evoking memories of Cold War-era civil defense drills and mass mobilization. Cuban authorities have so far not publicly confirmed the alleged weapons distribution, leaving the claims in a gray zone that still adds to the climate of anxiety on the island. The claims are emerging just as tensions between Washington and Havana intensify, with both rhetoric and economic pressure ramping up in a familiar but volatile pattern. Some accounts suggest that preparations for a potential conflict have already reached government offices, where staff are said to be reviewing contingency plans and basic logistics. A CNN correspondent based in Havana has said Cuban officials are quietly discussing invasion-era logistics, from fuel and food distribution to how key institutions would function under attack. Local accounts describe a public mood defined by anxiety, fatigue, and deep uncertainty, as ordinary Cubans grapple with shortages, sanctions, and the specter of a new showdown with the US. On June 5, Donald Trump claimed that Cuba had already sort of collapsed, using language that suggested he sees the island as teetering on the edge of economic and political failure. He made the remarks while discussing US policy toward Cuba, signaling that his administration views the current pressure campaign as both justified and effective. Trump also hinted that Cuba could become a future focus of US action, raising questions about whether Washington is contemplating additional steps beyond sanctions.
On Cuba, are your sanctions on Cuba meant to accelerate its collapse?
No, we just want them to be a nicely run country that can feed its people. Look, it's a failed nation. Without Venezuela, Venezuela, because it has such wealth in the ground, mostly in the ground, but Venezuela took care of them for years, and they took care of Venezuela. They were like the bodyguards. When we went in and burst into their country, the Venezuelans were guarding Maduro and everybody else. It was mostly, the soldiers were, in that case, we had a lot of Cubans were guarding. The Cubans were the guards, and they're good soldiers. But the country is starving, and it's got no energy, it's got no oil, it's got no money, it's got nothing. It's got a beautiful piece of land. You could have beautiful resorts. It doesn't have oil, but Venezuela was giving them the money to survive, and now, the money is, I guess you could say, is coming to us and is going to Venezuela. Venezuela's been an amazing thing because we've paid for the cost of the attack many, many times over. And it's been a long time since
you. Do you think that Cuba is close to collapsing, though, based on everything you just laid out? Do you think that Cuba is close to collapsing?
It sort of collapsed, and we're going to handle that as soon as we've finished. I like to do one thing at a time, and we'll take care of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And as soon as that's done on our way back, we'll just make a little brief stop.
Mr. President.
We'll take care of it. We want to help them out. Look, we have a lot of people that voted for Trump. Whether they did or not, it didn't matter. But I had 95% of the Cubans voted for me. They're unbelievable people. They're energetic. They're entrepreneurial. Some of the richest people in Miami are Cuban. They're unbelievable. And I'm going to take good care of them. I'm going to let them go back to their land. They want to be back with family. They have a lot of family over there. They've been treated very badly by Cuba. but we're going to treat Cuba well, and we're going to let our people go back and let them invest in Cuba if they'd like. So we have some very good plans for Cuba. I think, we have to get rid of the regime was very tough, very nasty. The difference is now they don't have money coming in. They had a lot of money coming in from Venezuela. They don't have any money coming. They had oil coming in. They had money coming in. But we're going to take care of Cuba.
Mr. President, sir. Mr. President.
And they, you know what? They want us to. The people want us there so bad.
On June 4th, Washington imposed a fresh round of sanctions on senior Cuban leadership figures, tightening the financial and diplomatic noose around the ruling elite. President Miguel Diaz-Canel himself was among those targeted, a move meant to personalize the pressure and send a signal that top officials will pay a direct price. Relatives of former leader Raul Castro were also hit by the measures, extending penalties to a wider circle around the historic core of Cuba's revolutionary leadership. These steps follow earlier moves, including an energy squeeze that sharply reduced fuel shipments to Cuba, causing power cuts and transport disruptions across the island. Washington has framed all of this as part of a broader pressure campaign on Havana, aimed at forcing political change and punishing what it calls repression and misrule. Havana, in turn, accuses the United States of escalating hostility through sanctions, calling them a form of economic warfare that hits ordinary Cubans hardest.
Raul reaches his 95 years, accompanying us and guiding us with his proverbial wisdom, which is a fortune that all revolutionaries celebrate and appreciate today and every day. On his behalf, because he has asked me to, I want to convey to our compatriots his infinite gratitude for the countless and emotional displays of solidarity, affection, and respect he has received these days as a popular reaction to the imperial slanders and for his birthday. He extends it to all the friends of the world who have publicly shown their affection in times of threats and reprisals against any gesture of commitment to Cuba. Raul is Raul, says the people in all the tribunes. The idea underscores the uniqueness of an exceptional figure who, along with Fidel, occupies a distinguished place in the dignified and uplifting history of the Cuban nation. For the sum of human values that distinguish him, it means heroism, dignity, and is a moral shield. It means having defeated several attempts to assassinate him because his courage and loyalty made him an early target of enemy intelligence services and the mercenaries trained and financed by them. Raul is Cuba and Cuba is untouchable. Long live free Cuba. The Cuban people repeat in tribunes call to repudiate the infamy of the accusations against Raul and the criminal collective punishment applied against the entire people. That genocide in the form of an energy blockade that seeks to suffocate the country. The historical enemies of the nation intended to humiliate Cuba with the accusation against its leader, and all they have achieved is to unleash the legendary rebellion of this people who repudiate and condemn them while singing congratulations to the Army General on one of the most celebrated birthdays remembered. The homeland lives at crucial hours, threatened as never before, by imperialism that once again believes it can subdue us and end the revolution. For this, and in front of the eyes of the world, violating all norms of international law, the United States government commits an act of genocide that imposes terrible limitations on the daily life of our people. It cannot be called anything other than a crime against humanity. The perverse way in which the United States executes against Cuba a plan aimed at provoking a humanitarian crisis throughout the nation, with the serious effects that are already beginning to be seen in children, the elderly, pregnant women, the disabled, and in general, in all our people, without exception. The increasingly undeniable reality is that the United States government makes every possible effort to lead the country towards a scenario of collapse crisis through economic imbalances, material shortages, and deprivations of the most basic needs of the people in their daily lives. It is a collective punishment that seeks to subdue and bring to its knees an entire nation that, despite the difficult moments it lives, does not renounce its independence nor yields to the pretensions of turning Cuba into a state tutored by them. That is the uncomfortable truth. Cuba does not surrender, Cuba insists and resists, and that insistence is intolerable for the empire. It was not enough for them with the total fuel blockade. In May, after a resounding demonstration of popular support for the revolution, they turned the screw on the blockade in an act of evident rage and frustration. That day they announced a new executive order full of threats, sanctions, seizures, fines to any company, bank, institution, or person that trades with Cuba, invests in Cuba, supplies Cuba. Even the most basic food, medicine, and hygiene supplies. The reaction of several companies that left Cuba these days is the result of the coercive measures of the U.S. government. They have unleashed that global terror based on another big lie, the criminalization of a Cuban business system like the GAE, without presenting a single proof or evidence. They have mounted a story of corruption and millionaire favoritism of a few that only fits in their biased heads. The attack on the GAE is not coincidental, it is not just another media campaign. They target a system of companies because they know of its effectiveness against the permanent economic siege of the United States against the Cuban people. The contributions of their companies to the socio-economic development of the country are notable. Cuba wants peace. Cuba does not provoke, does not attack, nor challenge. We continue betting on a climate of understanding with the United States based on mutual respect. Despite our differences, as it was demonstrated that it is possible. However, if the homeland is attacked, we will respond in legitimate defense.
The world's most powerful military is suddenly facing an uncomfortable reality, as mounting losses and unexpected vulnerabilities are forcing a reassessment of capabilities once considered unassailable. For the first time in years, questions are being asked about whether the United States' unmatched military power can reliably project force everywhere at will, and analysts are openly debating how sustainable that dominance is under current pressures. The U.S. Air Force is now hunting for unused MQ-9 Reapers after heavy combat losses against Iran and the Houthis, scrambling to find airframes wherever they can to plug critical capability gaps in surveillance and strike missions. The Air Force has confirmed plans to buy remaining unused MQ-1s from General Atomics, according to TWZ, a move intended to replenish stocks quickly even as longer-term procurement solutions are pursued. Interestingly, General Atomics reportedly has fewer than 10 spare MQ-9A drones available, a startlingly small number that underscores how tight the supply pipeline has become. Nearly 30 MQ-9 Reapers were reportedly lost during Operation Epic Fury against Iran, a tally that highlights the growing attrition rate U.S. remotely piloted aircraft face in high-threat environments. Additional dozens of Reapers were downed fighting Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen, further depleting the fleet and illustrating how low-tech but determined adversaries can exact a high price. The Air Force fleet shrank to about 135 MQ-9s, raising readiness concerns, according to TWZ, and fueling debate over how to sustain global operations with a reduced inventory. During this period, the U.S. Air Force inventory fell from 231 to 165 MQ-9s within a year, a rapid decline that has prompted urgent searches for replacement aircraft and interim solutions. Notably, MQ-9A production has ended and replacement MQ-9A aircraft are no longer being built, creating a manufacturing gap at a time when demand for these platforms remains high. General Atomics is now focused on the newer MQ-9B drone platform, shifting company resources and production capacity toward the next generation of remotely piloted systems. The MQ-9B differs significantly from the MQ-9A, complicating quick replacement plans because the newer design requires different training, logistics, and integration work before it can fully substitute for the older model. Reaper losses have left major gaps in U.S. surveillance and strike capabilities, forcing commanders to plan operations with fewer persistent sensors overhead and fewer precision strike options ready when targets appear. The downed MQ-9S are estimated to have cost around $1 billion combined, a sum that reflects not only the price of airframes and sensors but also lost mission time, replacement parts, and the operational value those drones provided. The U.S. Air Force chief called the Reaper the most valuable player against Iran, highlighting how its endurance and strike flexibility proved decisive even as commanders now grapple with replacing so many of them. Despite that praise, officials increasingly question the MQ-9S survivability in future wars, worrying that more advanced air defenses and electronic attack could make the platform far more vulnerable in contested environments. The Air Force has repeatedly failed to find a suitable successor to the Reaper, leaving a capability gap that has forced service leaders to rely on interim fixes while they search for a long-term replacement. In response, the U.S. Air Force has launched a fresh effort to develop an MQ-9 Next, a program intended to produce a more survivable, capable follow-on that can meet emerging threats and mission requirements. The U.S. Air Force has admitted concern over the growing attrition of MQ-9 drones, warning that sustained losses could degrade readiness, strain Allied operations, and limit the U.S. military's ability to maintain persistent global coverage. Retired MQ-1 Predator drones are being cannibalized for spare parts, an improvisational measure that underscores how maintenance crews are scrounging legacy components to keep aging and remaining MQ-9S flying. Over 50 MQ-1S at Amag were stripped to support MQ-1's operations, an extraordinary logistical step that illustrates the severity of the supply shortfall and the lengths being taken to sustain current mission demands. Amid the crises, General Atomics has rejected calls for cheap, disposable combat drones, arguing that hasty, low-cost designs would sacrifice the proven capabilities commanders need in real conflicts. The company said proven capabilities matter more than low-cost replacements, emphasizing that survivability, payload flexibility, and reliable sensors trump a strategy built around expendable airframes. General Atomics has highlighted years of lessons in weather, weapons, and operations, noting that those hard-won insights shape design choices that can't be replicated by rushed or untested programs. The company argues existing MQ-9s could receive survivability upgrades, suggesting improvements to avionics, countermeasures, and tactics could extend their usefulness while longer-term solutions mature. General Atomics stated that future drone concepts remain largely unproven, warning that novel architectures must demonstrate real-world performance before they can be relied upon to replace combat-proven systems. The company has mocked what it called make-believe drone projects lacking real-world testing, contending that enthusiasm for flashy prototypes must be tempered by rigorous evaluation against operational demands. Reaper losses have underscored the growing risks posed by advanced Iranian air defenses, showing how even relatively low-cost countermeasures and tactics can deny freedom of action to remotely piloted aircraft. The U.S. Air Force is now facing urgent pressure to rebuild its depleted drone fleet, scrambling to balance near-term replenishment with investments in more survivable next-generation platforms.